What's going on, Barefoot crew? Barefoot Will here, back with yet another barefoot shoe review. Today we're reviewing the Aion from Groundz. Before we jump into the rest of the review, I just want to remind you that you can use code BarefootWill for 10% off of your order of any shoe from the Groundz store. All right, let's dive into the specifics. First thing, as always, is the aesthetic appeal of the shoe. And this shoe may be a little bit more recognizable. To me, it reflects the aesthetic appeal and the total look of a Nike Dunk. Specifically in this colorway, you would refer to it as the Panda colorway in the Dunk. They went with the name Orca for this colorway, which I think fits very, very well. And honestly, there's been a lot of barefoot shoe companies that have made an attempt to create a good reflection of the Nike Dunk. Most of the barefoot shoe companies have fallen short of doing a good job until this shoe specifically from Groundz. And we needed a good barefoot version of that shoe. And this, in my opinion, is definitely the best reflection and the best barefoot minimalist shoe option as a replacement for that specific shoe from Nike. Now, there are going to be some notable aesthetic differences between the Nike Dunk and this shoe, obviously. The first thing I want to go over is the toe box shape. Now, we're going to get into the feel of the toe box as well, but just from an aesthetic standpoint, this was one of the things I didn't totally like about this shoe, and I'll explain why. So I don't know how well you can see this on camera. Maybe I'll throw up some B-roll, but the big toe side of the end of the toe box comes to a little bit more of a square type shape. And I think maybe some of that squarish type shape may come from this little bit of a drop down of the outsole right here at the tip of where your big toe goes. But from this point of view, like if you're looking straight down at your feet, then it still has just a little bit more of that square taper look to it. And then you actually have more of that rounded look when you get to the outer side of the shoe. I don't think this is something that a lot of people are going to notice like out on the streets when you're wearing them, but from the first person point of view, this is definitely something that I noticed relatively quickly after putting them on and like pulling them out of the box. But you know, I have an eye for this kind of stuff. This is, this is my job to really be nitpicky. Now, aside from the toe box, I think that Groundz crushed it as far as the aesthetics of this shoe go. I really personally love this kind of dark copper inlay that they put right here on the middle of the shoe, and that's actually reflected on both sides. I think they did a pretty cool job of adding some signature logos to the outside as well. So you have the grounded logo here, grounded logo on the back, and then just a little bit on the tongue logo, and then obviously the model name back here as well. I am actually a huge fan of the grounding symbol, and having that included on the side of a shoe is really cool. If I was a little bit more brave and bold, I would probably actually get this symbol, this grounding symbol, tattooed on me somewhere. I don't have any tattoos at the moment, but if I were to get a tattoo, I think that that would be a sick looking tattoo. And really from an outsider's point of view, the aesthetic of this shoe does a good job of looking more like a normal shoe. You don't really look at this shoe and think, hey, you know, what kind of shoe is that? And a lot of barefoot shoes actually have that component to it. It's very noticeable that the barefoot shoe is different than conventional shoes. The quality of the materials from this shoe really add to the aesthetic component of the shoe as well. You can really tell that there is a top-notch component to the materials that were used to comprise the shoe, which we're going to get more in depth in the materials later in this review. But the next somewhat obvious component of this shoe that I definitely want to talk about more is the grounding component. Now, if you've seen some of my previous reviews, or if you're familiar with a lot of other shoes that offer the grounding component, even Groundz has a model that has the copper plug in the bottom of the sole of some of their shoes. Typically the copper plug makes contact with the ground, comes through the insole of the shoe, makes contact with the bottom of your foot, and bada bing, bada boom, you are grounded. Now, they went a little bit with a different route for the Aion. They actually used this technique on one of their previous shoes as well. And what they did was add a couple of areas on the outsole. And these two areas, I'm pretty sure it's just these two areas. If it's the whole sole, I apologize, but I'm pretty sure it's just these two. They have a carbon infused rubber. So that carbon infusion is what makes it conductive. And then that carbon infused rubber then makes its way to a layer of the kind of a lasting piece on the inside of the shoe. And then that makes its way to the conductive layer of the insole. So you can see right at the top here that you can kind of see that stitching that is woven in through the insole. And that's just the kind of the third layer of conductivity that is actually allowing the electron exchange through the shoe from the earth into the bottom of your foot. Now, while I have the insole pulled out, this is a good point for me to make, and this is going to be the stack height of the shoe. So if you're unfamiliar with the term stack height, that is just the thickness of the sole or the cushion level of the sole. So this one's going to be relatively thin, which means that it allows a lot of flexibility through the actual sole itself. And then we have this added insole. I believe the added insole is a 2mm insole. And then the outsole here is going to be somewhere around 5mm. I believe the total stack height with both the outsole and the insole added is somewhere in that 7mm range. So it's not going to be super cushiony. It does have a nice amount of comfort, not an overabundance of cushioning in comparison to some of the other more 14mm style shoes that you would see, but it does allow just a little bit more of like cushioning the blow type effect when you're walking on like a gravel surface, something like that. I didn't get that oversensitive feeling where I could feel every single little rock that I was walking on, but I did notice that the sole is flexible enough and I have enough ground feel to kind of feel what my foot needs to do in those type of scenarios where it needs to torque and twist in certain different ways. But I'm not getting just a whole lot of like sharp blows to the bottom of my foot. I briefly alluded to the flexibility of the shoe, and it is definitely quite flexible and pliable. Now, this was not the case when I initially pulled them out of the box. It took a solid 2 to 3 weeks to actually break this shoe in to where it was a little bit more flexible and comfortable to wear for a long period of time during the day. And I attribute that to the quality of the materials, to be honest with you. Any type of leather component shoe, it's going to be a little bit more rigid at first, and then leather does its thing, and then it tends to kind of shape to the foot, and then it also becomes quite flexible in your own flexible patterns. So now, in the rear of the shoe, you have some flexibility here, but it's also kind of odd how well that the rear heel cup of the shoe stays a little bit more rigid, which in my opinion is nice, especially for getting the shoe on, getting the shoe off, and the overall aesthetic of the shoe. I don't really like when barefoot shoes get real floppy at the rear, and as you can tell, like this has really held its shape quite well. Now, another big upside to this shoe is the fact that it has a detached tongue. So a lot of barefoot shoes recently have went to the model of a sock style fit. That is not the case for this shoe. The tongue is completely detached, meaning if you have a higher profile arch or a high volume foot where your ankle tends to be a little bit thicker, the top of your foot usually sits a little bit higher in the shoe. This shoe will allow that with grace, and overall comfort for a person with a high volume foot is going to be much easier to find in this specific shoe. Now I want to go over the uses or applications that I have found pleasant with this shoe. And that is going to be pretty much your everyday streetwear type of application, or maybe going out on a date with your wife, maybe going to a baseball game, something like that. I don't really find myself going to this shoe for any type of like gym type of work or workout style stuff. I really think that the primary purpose behind this shoe should stay in the category of casual streetwear. I did take this shoe to the gym a few times just to see how it performed. It didn't do bad necessarily, but it's just a shoe that I think is built for other purposes aside from the gym. It does have a decent tackiness to like a rubberized gym floor, but as you can see, there's not really much of a lug on the sole of the shoe. So you're not gonna get just a ton of grip out of it. This is also a shoe that I probably would not go hiking in. It truly is one of those shoes, in my opinion, that you're just gonna use a lot for casual wear. Of course, this shoe is gonna come with all your typical Barefoot features, such as no toe spring. It's gonna have a zero drop sole and a nice roomy toe box. I alluded to the shape of the toe box earlier for aesthetic reasons. Now I wanna talk about the feel of the toe box. So, just like the aesthetic appeal, that square shape kind of took me by surprise for an initial few seconds. The feel of the toe box is definitely different than in other Barefoot shoes. So you can definitely feel that squaring off component. It takes a little bit of a getting used to initially with each time that I actually put this shoe on. So I don't know if you can see this on camera, but there is just a very slight taper inwards into the big toe. I can feel that personally because my toe, my big toe specifically, is automatically super splayed out. So I do feel a minor amount of touch, not pressure necessarily, but just a little bit of touch initially when I put the shoe on. And then once again, I have a very wide toe splay. So on the outer toe side, on the pinky toe side, I can feel just a little bit of, once again, just a little bit of touch on the pinky toe side as well. So if you haven't already, I would actually look into your foot shape as far as the toe shape. For some people's toes, they have like a mountain or a slope. There's different foot shapes. You can Google it. This shoe fits probably more of the sloped foot person versus someone who has a very wide splay. Now, I have the wide splay and I do wear this shoe actually quite often, and I don't find it uncomfortable to wear because of the toe box. I just find that the initial probably 5 minutes of me wearing the shoe, I'm a little bit more aware of the difference in shape of the toe box. Now, after my foot kind of desensitizes to it, I do find that the toe box is pleasantly roomy. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of restriction of my toes to do what they need to do inside of the toe box. And to be quite honest with you, the little bit more of a narrowish, I'm not calling it narrow, but slightly more narrow-ish toe box shape is kind of appealing in a streetwear setting. So it's not gonna be quite as eye-catching to the people that are walking around beside you when you're out on the town. So one profound aspect of this shoe that has really stood out to me is the build quality of this shoe. Everything from the leather on the upper, the sole of the shoe, the lace quality, the tongue quality, the footbed quality, it has really surprised me. To me, this is one of the more top quality shoes that I've actually been sent and asked to try out. And it has really done a great job of holding its shape quite well. There's no signs of like really abnormal wear, and I really have been wearing the crap out of this shoe. This specific shoe does come in a couple of other colorways, and the white on white colorway is really sick looking to me, and also the white and gray colorway was really sick as well. Sizing on this shoe, I typically wear a men's 10.5 or 43 in most of the EU sizes, and that's exactly how this one is sized, 10.5, 43, and this shoe fits my foot perfectly. Now, obviously, one of the main aspects of the shoe is going to be the price point of the shoe. So the barrier to entry is going to be a little bit more on the pricey side. I believe normally this shoe sits somewhere around $210. Now, to me, that may be a little bit on the pricey end. However, do I think it's justified? Absolutely. And I would not have been able to say that the price was justified unless I actually put a considerable amount of time in these shoes. And like I spoke about before, the build quality and the durability has completely justified that price point. Now, if you do want a little bit of a discount at checkout, you can use my code BarefootWill, no spaces, and that will be good for an additional 10% off. All right, that's gonna wrap up the review for the Groundz Aion. If you have any additional questions, be sure to drop those in the comment section below. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've got a lot more shoe reviews on deck, so be on the lookout for those. And if you have any other shoes that you would like for me to review, be sure to leave those suggestions in the comments. All right guys, we'll catch you on the next review. We'll see you soon.